If I employ somebody and I no longer want to employ this person, it's now going to cost me twice as much. They, the policymakers, know that their law causes unemployment. Exempt the unemployed from the labour law. In some districts, some areas, not a single person who is with disability has a job, not one.
We've got a massive economy in South Africa that we like to call the township economy or informal economy, but actually it's an economy operating with its own rules and operating on its own.
But just remember that the point is it's technically criminal.
Are the Chinese a communist country with capitalist tendencies, or are they a capitalist country with communist tendencies? Welcome to Through the Liberty Lens with Leon Lowe. I'm Tom London, and today we discuss the Labour Law Amendment Bill and the Labour Relations Amendment Bill. It all sounds very complicated, but we're going to break it down for you in this chat. Leon Lowe sits opposite me. Welcome home, Leon. Good to have you in the studio.
Good to be with you, Tom, as always. Lovely, and we're discussing a thing here that affects the most needy people in our country, so it's close to my heart.
Important conversation. What is your position on the Labour Relations Act as it stands?
Well, the Labour Relations Act has, for many people, good intentions and for many people, bad intentions.
How so?
We've got to understand both. The good intentions are, of course, to make working conditions better for people who have jobs, for labour. Safer, cleaner, better pay, better holidays, better pregnancy leave, parental leave, as it's now called, and so on and so forth. So the good intention is to improve things for people with jobs. The bad intention, which I'm afraid is the dominant one, is to make it more and more difficult, if not impossible, for people without a job to get a job. In other words, by privileging the people with a job, protecting them, making sure they don't lose their job, it means someone without a job can't take their job. So the people who have absolutely perverse motives are the people who want to create entry barriers with labour laws against people who would otherwise have jobs.
You make the distinction between the employed and the unemployed. And we assume that there's an unemployment rate in South Africa that can be trusted, a percentage, for example. Can we? Can we trust the unemployment rate that we're quoted?
Well, the unemployment rate itself is not trusted by the people who produce it, because what they do is they say there's an expanded version.
Well, what is the difference between a real and expanded version?
Okay. A real version is, in theory, the number of people who are job seekers, registered job seekers, people who are registered as people who don't have a job and want a job. The problem is, of course, that many people with a job are registered job seekers because they want a better job, and many people without a job aren't registered job seekers because they don't know how to, or they think they're going to find one anyway. So whether the registered job seekers is very accurate, we don't know, but that's the normal around the world. You regard that as what we call the unemployed. The expanded definition is if you add the people who are now disaffected and disillusioned and no longer bother. So they've just left, they gave up. They were registered, they didn't get a job, and they've given up, they're no longer seeking a job. And if you add them, you have the expanded definition, which is the real definition. In other words, the official definition is the officially wrong definition. The expanded definition is the officially correct, or the closer to correct definition. But it's also, in many important senses, an overstatement. In other words, fewer people are unemployed than that number says. On the other hand, more people are unemployed, depending on what you mean by the word unemployed. So, for example, if you think the only people we will call employed are the ones with a registered job, governed by the law, then you exclude all the people in the so-called informal or unrecorded or underground economy. So peasant labourers and part-time labourers and people working in the lower income groups in the townships and the settlements and the rural areas, they are not considered employed, which of course they obviously are employed. So if you include them, then the unemployment rate is lower than the official or the expanded rate. If you exclude them and you include all the people who would like another job or would like a job, then it's an understatement. So it's an exaggeration or an understatement, depending on how you look at it.
Why did you feel it was necessary to make a submission in response to the call for public comment on the bills?
Because the proposals that are being made, which will all improve the position of people fortunate enough, privileged enough to have a job, will make it terrible for people who don't have a job. It's a ghastly, it's actually inhumane and cruel to make these proposals for the privileged, those with jobs, against as the victims the destitute, the unemployed, the youth, the elderly, the disabled. These are the people who are really, the cruelty inflicted on them is unbelievable. I don't know how people in favor of these measures sleep at night. Do they ever think about what they're doing to the people who don't have a job?
You make this point in your submission that the truly unemployed have got it worst off in this country because they don't receive social grants, for example. There's no help for the truly unemployed.
Correct, yes. Everyone assumes that social grants go to everybody who needs help. No, it doesn't. It goes to people who qualify for social grants under the criteria for social grants. And that is, for example, age and having children and other conditions. But many people who are unemployed don't get social grants, and they are the ones who tend to be forgotten and victimized. And there's a kind of weird, amorphous feeling that somehow they're being looked after. No, they aren't. They are destitute, and they are dependent on relatives and friends who look after them.
And the LRA and the amendments do nothing to address this group of people.
No, it makes it worse. It says that unless you can find somebody willing to pay you more than they think you're worth, you're not allowed to have a job. It makes getting a job prohibited. It's a prohibition on the freedom to work, the freedom to get a job. And it is quite extraordinary. Let me give you some examples. Firstly, The expanded definition is nearly half of the entire workforce. Of everyone wanting a job, nearly half, 43 or 44%, are unemployed officially. In addition to that, there are people who aren't even disaffected, aren't even included in that. So let's call it 50% for a round number.
Sure.
Half of all people who want a job don't have a job. So what are those people doing? And they are busy begging. They're busy, 70% of young black women, for example.
Unemployed.
And what about disabled people? This is the most extraordinary. People with disabilities. Disabled is no longer, let's call it a politically sensitive word, but people with disabilities. For them, we're looking at nearly 100%. In some districts, some areas, not a single person who is with disability has a job, not one. In some areas, it's maybe 3% employment or 4%. In other words, 90 to 100% of people with disabilities are unemployed. Now, to do that, to inflict that on the most vulnerable people in society, in my view, is an extraordinary act of human cruelty and inhumanity. I don't know. And this is what the law does, and that's why we oppose it. We oppose it because we care about people who are destitute, who are needy, who cannot get a job, who don't have the skills, who don't have the correct age, who don't have the correct gender, who don't live in the correct place. There are many places where it's worse than in other places, and so the people migrate. They literally walk for days on end in search of somewhere where they can get a job. They beg for jobs. They get jobs that are unlawful and unregistered and illegal. And it's those people who we should care for. When those people have jobs, when we have ended unemployment in South Africa, then we can start looking at laws like this. Laws like this are a luxury for people with jobs.
So to be clear, the LRA concerns employers and employees, and it has nothing to do really with the unemployed in South Africa. We must understand that.
Yes, it concerns big business and big labor.
Okay.
Organized business, organized labor. It excludes small business, informal business, micro enterprises, so-called small, medium and emerging enterprises, SMMEs. And it excludes rural, it excludes part-time casual workers, people who want so-called gigs, just a job for a month,
Yeah.
picking corn or cotton or milking cattle or whatever it is. During harvest season, they get a job. There are all sorts of people like that out there. And these laws make their lives utterly intolerable. And as I say, we must understand the cruelty, the inhumanity. These laws which appear decent, let's have nice working conditions, let's have more pay, let's have longer holidays.
For those lucky enough to have a
Let's
job.
Yeah. And you, it's what's called in economics the seen and the unseen. You see the person with a job. You see the person protected by the labor relations amendments. You see the person with children getting free time off to care for their children. You see them. You don't see the single, unwed, unemployed mother of a child living under a bridge, living in the bush.
And are you saying it's going to be more difficult for her to get a job in the future because of these amendments and because of these acts?
Of course, if you make it more expensive, more difficult, and more risky to employ somebody, fewer people get employed. And the people who get employed are the ones with skills.
Yeah.
The people who don't get a job don't have. In other words,
The rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
The people who can be more productive because they can use technology.
Yeah.
And you replace people with machines. For example, just think of a restaurant. Who do you think washes the dishes after the evening?
I know because I was in the restaurant, the scullery guy. It's the entry-level job into the hospitality industry.
Well, except they're now replaced by dishwashing machines. So people who used to actually wash dishes are now replaced by machines. And so it is in many
an
jobs.
employer, I would go, why would I want the hassle of employing somebody when I can just spend money on a dishwashing machine, for example?
A dishwashing machine
and there's a
never
job
goes on
gone.
strike. A dishwashing machine
Yeah.
doesn't demand better pay. A dishwashing
It doesn't
machine
have
belong
babies.
to a
It doesn't
union.
need to go look after
It doesn't
babies.
get pregnant, and so just fire the workers and buy a machine.
All right. So which amendments? So we've established that you've got a problem with the LRA in general, but now we've got these amendments. Which amendments worry you? I'd imagine all of them.
Yes, there's a range of them. And for example, the ones that say that there will be joint parenting, in other words, two parents will get, I forget the figure, 4 months and 10 days or some such number, doesn't really matter, parental leave. Now it's going to be split or shared between mothers and fathers, but of course there are not many fathers around for the majority of the people. But more seriously than that, the question is, what happens if each of them works for a different employer? Do both employers have to give them holiday? Or does only one give them one a holiday?
Has the
and not
bill
other?
answered that question?
No, it doesn't.
Not.
I tried to find out. I looked that up. And so there are many. So there are conditions like, for example, severance pay, that it used to be 1 week per year worked.
Yes.
It's now 2 weeks, in other words, twice as much. So now what you do as an employer, you say, if I employ somebody and I no longer want to employ this person, it's now going to cost me twice as much to discontinue their employment. So I'm going to avoid employing them in the first place. That's what causes unemployment. If you make unemployment difficult, costly, and risky, you have less employment. So what you want to do is exactly the opposite. You want to say to employers, we are going to make it as appealing and attractive to you as possible to give people jobs. The other thing you can do, which is the best thing of all, is to exempt the unemployed from the labor law. In other words, let them say, if you have been a job seeker, if you've been unemployed for example, 6 months, 2 months, a year, whatever, choose a number, for whatever period, then you are entitled to take whatever job you wish.
Now, this is not in the amendments.
it's
This is in your
The
submission.
amendment does the opposite.
Yeah.
Our submission says what you want to do is you want to make it easier to get a job. The amendments make it more difficult to get a job. Therefore, the amendments are, as I say, cruel and inhumane to South Africa's most needy people.
What amendments are being proposed when it comes to the minimum wage?
It's the minimum wage. Well, firstly, there's one national minimum wage. and there are various other minimum wages, which proves to you that there's no logic in the minimum wage. In other words, if you have one for a rural area, or one for a regional area, or one for a certain job and not another job, shows that there's no sort of objective truth involved. So what is proposed for the minimum wage is to extend it, increase it, and make it more applicable. However, there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, which is to say it won't apply to small employers, new employers, emerging employers for a period. In other words, they, the policymakers, know that their law causes unemployment. They know that the law prevents small people from emerging small and informal businesses from getting off the ground and operating. So they try and make it easier. And what they do is, it's like, this is what you must imagine. Somebody's sitting with a baby on their lap. With one hand, they're holding a bottle, feeding the baby, and with the other hand is around the baby's throat, throttling it. So they throttle the unemployed baby at the same time as supposedly trying to feed it.
So I would imagine that any amendment that is punitive in some way when it comes to employers wouldn't be welcomed by employers. So employers would probably look at these amendments and go, well, we'd rather not have them. You've explained quite eloquently why the unemployed shouldn't be in support of amendments like this. But the employed might turn around and say, Leon, no, leave our jobs alone. We're quite happy with this increase in national minimum wage. We're quite happy with the shared parental leave. We're quite happy with the bargaining council amendments that we've got. Like, why would we want anything different? If I've got a job, why would I want it? And why would it be bad for me? And why would it be bad?
I'll tell you why it's bad for you, because you might lose your job. Anything that makes your job more expensive to the person who gives you the job makes it more likely that you'll lose your job. So you might smile now because you've got a job, but you should pause and think, hold on a sec, does this mean I won't have a job in 6 months or a year or a week?
Yeah.
And so that's one reason you should worry. The other thing is, you talk about employers. Some employers welcome us. Some employers love labor laws that drive their competitors out of business. In other words, big employers versus small employers, emerging employers. Now, you say we talk about the unemployed. We talk a lot about just the people who can be self-employed, people who want to run small and informal businesses and employ relatives and friends and neighbors and so on. They are the ones who are technically right now operating unlawfully. In other words, if you go into the East Bank of Alex, which is the poorer part of Alex Township outside Johannesburg, near us here, well, just a bit more.
You might find someone working for $100 a day, for example.
That is correct. And that even if they're working for $1,000 a day, they are technically unlawful. They are not registered.
Yeah.
They are not members of a trade union, not that they have to be in South Africa. Fortunately, our law doesn't make it compulsory. But they are working for employers who aren't paying tax, who aren't registered, who don't have registered companies. In other words...
Isn't that a huge part of our economy, though? I mean, Is that not what we don't want to talk about this? We don't want to acknowledge this, that we've got a massive economy in South Africa that we like to call the township economy or informal economy. But actually, it's an economy operating with its own rules and operating on its own.
But just remember that the point is, it's technically criminal. It's
Yes.
the criminalized economy. We shouldn't call it the informal sector, which is neither informal nor is it a sector. It's the criminalized sector. Everything that happens in it is a criminal offense, technically. Now, the law is not enforced. As you say, it just happens. It's sort of out there going on, and we all know it. Well, the point is yes and no. Inspectors and police go around and correct fines and threaten to close people down unless they pay bribes. And so it's a source of bribery and corruption and coercion and victimization. If somebody belongs to the wrong political group and you belong to the right one and you happen to be a city councillor, you can have the person you don't like shut down. So the point is, we have the criminal economy in which millions of South Africans live. Everything they do is technically a criminal offense. And we have the lawful economy, which is very sophisticated and cute and pretty, and operates in big businesses with labor brokers.
Every I dotted and every T crossed.
And everyone's registered, and they have tea breaks, and they have parental leave and so on and so forth. So we have these two economies, these parallel economies. What we want to do is decriminalize all South African activity, make criminals lawful people, freely operating, employing, running businesses, trading, and apply ordinary common law that says you have to honor your contracts and you have to have safe and reasonable working conditions. That law applies anyway. These laws don't create safe working conditions.
Got it. Let's go back to the Act. Is it a word, a phrase, an acronym? I don't even know. You've used this in your submission and you've used it in conversation with me. Tunstafel? What is it, Tunstafel?
Yes. There's really, in my view, one law of economics. And if you understand that, you should get a PhD in economics. In not even one law, just one word, Tunstafel. That's Tanstaafl. Now, that's an acronym for there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That's what it means.
Which means what in this context? Because here we have the higher minimum wage, we've got more parental leave, we've got more this, more that. So
there is no benefit without a cost. In other words, when you have a benefit, parental leave, application or extension of bargaining council agreements, then you should say that's the benefit.
Yeah.
What's the cost?
The cost is you don't have that person on the job for that.
You don't have that person, or it excludes someone else, or it makes it more expensive, or whatever. And so there is always a cost involved. So all of these benefits look lovely, but you should say at what price. Now, I'm going to give you a tough example. You're sitting at a dinner party and somebody says, really, we ought to pay the police more. Then what you should say is, that's interesting. In other words, you want more people dying in hospital. They say, why do you say that? And you say, well, if you take money for police, where do you take it from? You take it from healthcare, right? From nursing. Or if you have, we must pay teachers more. You say,
you won't be able to when there's an NHI because that will be taking everything from everyone.
So let's pay teachers more.
Yeah.
Then you should say, in other words, you want more rape. What do you mean? Well, it means you want less police, right? Because you've got to take money from something to fund. You've got to take money.
Is that a big problem you deal with? That in the minds of the average Joe, like I include myself here, right? Say, look, we're going to amend the Labor Relations Act. There'll be more parental leave. The minimum wage will go up. You stand on the outside of that and you go, well, that looks lovely.
Yes, that is correct.
That looks lovely.
Paying teachers more looks lovely.
But it's not the truth.
But that's provided you don't think about the person who gets raped who would otherwise have had police protection. In other words, you've got to understand at what price. So what I do sometimes at dinner parties when somebody says we should pay teachers more, I say, are you in favor of more rape? And they say, what do you mean? And I say, well, with what money will you pay the teachers? You're taking it away from policing, healthcare, park maintenance, services, job creation, investment, something. Tell me what you want less of.
Do you think we switched on?
What you want more of. Tell me what you want less of.
Do you think we switched on as a country to that idea? Do you think as a country, as South Africa, when politicians promise us more this, more that, do you think as a country we go, well, where does it come from and who loses out in this equation?
I think that is, you've hit the nail on the head. That is the problem. And it's not our country, every country. All political promises presuppose zero cost.
Yeah.
They presuppose benefits without costs. Now, I had an interesting one with I just love him. He's a very lovely, friendly chap, the security guard at the gate at the complex where I stay. And I don't think he'll mind me naming him Max. Great guy. And he was telling me about how his mother doesn't get enough social security and she needs a better pension and she can't live on what she gets. So I said to him, where should the government get the money to give her? And he looked puzzled. And he said, you mean for the government to give her more money, it has to take the money somewhere? And I said, yes. What money do you think it should take? And he said, I've never thought of that. Why did
we don't, do we, when we made these promises?
And now he says to me, he says, I now understand that for the government to give, it must first take. And this was like for him. So now I think he needs a PhD in economics. I think he now understands economics. And do we as a country? No. But Max, as a security guard at the gate, understands economics now.
Under the LRA, if I employ someone, I think I've got, a 3-month probation period that, if it doesn't work out in the first 90 days, I can say, thank you very much. You can leave now. But after that, you're in like Flynn. I can't, you're going to battle to get rid of you if I don't like you.
All sorts of things. You used to, gig jobs, like having a gig.
Well, you talk about freedom of contracts.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So what I say is that what you should be able to do is you should offer someone, I've got this problem right now. I want to offer someone work, but I don't want to get trapped into the labor law. So now when I look at the labor law, almost no matter anything I do is going to trap me in it. So all I can do is give this person a task and say, do this following task, and when you finish, that's it, I pay you, you're gone. I can't give them a job and say, so long as I have a need for this job, you have this job.
I'm sitting in that situation.
Yeah.
Well, here I am on my own. I run this podcast studio on my own, but it would be nice to have someone who comes in twice a week with me.
Yes.
And I could teach how to point a camera and how to set it up and put microphones together and, the technical stuff that it would help if someone was assisting me. But I don't need someone 5 days a week.
Yes.
But I might bring them in 2 days a week or 3 days a week for a couple of hours. But very soon I might find myself in a situation where that person's
You absolutely will.
classed as a permanent employee.
If you are the major source of their income, they are now your employee, and you're subject to all the labor law, and you're subject to bargaining council agreements that someone else entered into that you had nothing to
You
do
see, as a small business owner, a micro business owner, really, I look at that situation and go, well, I'll carry on carrying the bags myself. Thank you very much.
Or what you do is you employ people only for short piecework that doesn't make you subject to the labor law. In other words, you say, I'll give you a job for 3 weeks.
Or you try and circumvent it altogether.
Find ways of circumventing it, yes. And you can do that by having
you go open a company and then you sell me a service and I'll pay your company instead of you.
When they say companies below a certain size won't apply to them, well, all that does is it makes people create lots and lots of small companies and lots of new companies and close the old ones. And so it just subjects people to insane amounts of paperwork to try and evade the law and implement something completely rational, which they and the employees are happy with.
Let's talk about gig workers. I mean, you mentioned it a little earlier on. All I do is use e-hailing. I don't have a car. I use Bolt and Uber, and I've been doing that for 8 years now. So, and I chat to every single one of those drivers, and I think there've been about 4,000 or 5,000 in the last 8 or 9 years. So I've met a lot of them. Most of them have taken those jobs because during COVID they lost a permanent job, for example, or the job they had wasn't paying enough and they upgraded to e-hailing or cab driver, and they're earning their 20,000 Rand a month or whatever it might be. Now, they're sitting outside of the formal economy at the moment because they're not registered for tax, they're not registered for anything. They're just, they're registered with the system. If you had to say to that guy driving the cab around, who let's say is earning 20,000 Rand a month, if you had to say to him, all right, we're going to start taking money from you now, we're going to take 3,000 Rand, we're going to tax you. They are likely to turn around and say, no, you're not. And we've seen what the taxi industry has to say about taxation in South Africa. And now we've seen other sectors going, we don't like this idea of being taxed while we're small and growing and funding ourselves. Podcasters are in the spotlight at the moment. The government is saying we need to take a look at podcasters, and the response from podcasters is leave us alone while we grow in this business. It's all very weird. You've got some businesses and huge sectors that don't pay tax. You've got some that do and well organized, and then you've got others in the middle, and you've got others coming up. And how do you pull all of these people together into one system that works?
Well, firstly, what you do is you make the laws reasonable so that every reasonable person says, I can relate to that, I can apply that law, I can live with that law. So an example would be, say, building codes.
Yeah.
If building codes say you have to have a ceiling of a certain height or a wall of a certain thickness, and you don't want a wall that thick, then you just ignore the building code and you just violate it. So if you want people to comply with it, then have it reasonable. In other words, something that everybody says that is what should apply. Now, so it is with everything. So e-hailing. Should the person own their own car? Should they rent a car? Should it be some joint? Now, let them negotiate the deal they want. You don't have to have it regulated. You don't have to have some government official approving and passing it.
Yeah, I keep thinking of the e-hailing driver, because what's coming in the future, first thing that's going to come is there's a sector that has been grown out of nothing, right? And it's now a business, it's a sector. And government will go, well, we need to tax that sector. And not just the companies that run these services, but the individual drivers as well. We want some of their income. We want income tax from them. So I'm driving a cab around, I'm earning 20 grand a month. The price of petrol's going up. The inflation figures don't go down, they go up. So my costs are going up. And then government comes along and says, we want to take 15 or 20 or whatever % out of your salary, and that comes to us. And then to add insult to injury, they're going to turn around and say, oh, by the way, now you need to start paying national health insurance levies on your money as well. So that person who was earning 20,000 Rand a month is now earning 15,000 Rand a month. They can't afford to survive on that money anymore. What do they do? So, the logical answer is put the prices up. Instead of paying 150 Rand to come to work via Uber like I do, it will cost 200 Rand. Well, I might just decide to come in twice a week instead of 3 times a week. And your Tanstafel, there's no such thing as a free lunch, starts kicking in. And I start seeing your logic here, that at some point it actually starts hurting people.
Yes, and that is the question in economics, is what's the thing on balance? Economics teaches you one thing really and one thing only in the end, that everything is a trade-off. Everything you ever do is a trade-off. If you brush your teeth in the morning, you're trading off the time and the wear and tear on your toothbrush and the use of your toothpaste against what you could have been doing instead, which is getting a second cup of coffee or getting to work earlier or something. So everything everyone ever does in life is a subjective choice between preferred alternatives. And everything you choose is a sacrifice of that which you did not choose, which you forego. So if you decide to go to soccer, it means you decided not to go to rugby or cricket or whatever, or not to go to a restaurant, or not to go to a nightclub, or not to buy nice food or clothes or something. So everything in life is a trade-off. So the question to be asked always is, what's the trade-off? And the trade-off is that if people pay more, they will supply less and do less. And so what the government wants to do to stimulate the economy and generate growth and generate jobs is to tax less, take less away, regulate less, allow people more freedom.
Can you get a politician to understand something like that?
Well, the strange thing is that this has actually been happening in the world. The world over the last 50 years is becoming more and more and more free economically, more and more free civil liberties, freedom of the media, freedom of press. More and more countries are democracies. And so all of the indices, the Freedom House Index, the Economic Freedom of the World, the competitiveness, the World Bank doing business index, etc., all show things becoming freer.
Would you point to someone like Javier Milei as being an example?
Fantastic example. No, he is just beautiful. Though he's in favor of Murray Rothbard, who's one of my heroes, who basically thinks we don't actually need governments at all. Everything can be done without a government.
Does this mean turning our backs on political ideologies like socialism, for example?
Yes, you want to turn your back on any ideology and just go for what works, what's practical. So, for example, this is what the Chinese have done. Many people marvel at the Chinese miracle.
I wanted to ask you, are the Chinese a communist country with capitalist tendencies, or are they a capitalist country with communist tendencies?
Well, economically, what China has done, firstly, you ask the question as if there's one China, one system.
Yes.
What system is it? As soon as you ask that question, now you've lost the plot, because China is many systems, multiple systems. Each of the, I think it's 26 or so provinces of China it's a real federation where each one is completely different, has its own economic system, its own civil laws. And Mao's little red book, when I was a communist, I used to study the red book, used to complain endlessly about how the different provinces would not all follow one rule. They never got centralized power in China. In other words, communism was never technically.
And would that explain why a place like Shenzhen would be a manufacturing?
This is the very important thing about China. What they did is, whatever the government is called, the Communist Party, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of irrelevant what it's called. The fact is they have created these special economic zones, originally 6, adding Hong Kong makes it essentially 7, and they've created another. And then they've created literally hundreds of other zones, free cities, open ports, technical and economic hubs, all sorts of things, export processing zones. There are about 2,000 different types of economy in China. And all of the ones that are outside the regulated economy, including entire cities like Shanghai, are the freest economies on earth, and perhaps the freest economies that have ever existed. Wow. They're completely free, and some of them, like Guangzhou and others, have growth rates of 20-25% per annum. You can't believe that. The accumulation of wealth and the creation of jobs and technology is almost incomprehensible.
Is it that obvious? I mean, is it that obvious that if you want, is it that, I mean, this is going to sound silly, but is it that obvious that if you want an economy to grow, you need to relax the restrictions, lower the barriers to entry, and make it easier for people to do business? It sounds like it's common sense, but so difficult to get right.
Yes, in South Africa, we sent fact-finding missions to China to find out how do they do it, and they came back and they said they have special economic zones. They got that part right. The Chinese miracle is the special zones. They're huge. They're places the size of, say, Gauteng. And so they came back and we had industrial development zones, IDZs, like one outside East London, this sort of vacant piece of land with tar roads and stormwater drains and an admin building in the middle and 1 or 2 warehouses. So they said, oh, well, what do we? So they changed the name from an IDZ, Industrial Development Zone, to an SEZ, a Special Economic Zone, and thought, oh, we got the name wrong. No.
The concept
What's wrong
wrong.
is that there's nothing special about the special economic zones. Now, I'm working at the moment with one of them. I won't name it. Maybe they don't want me to name it yet. To turn them into a truly special zone. Special means outside the South African economy, offshore. It means literally in the China special economic zones and other places like SEZs and free cities and open ports and so on. They will have 10-year tax holidays extended easily on application to 5 to 15 years. So 15 years, zero tax, no import controls, no labor restrictions. If people, you're free to bring in any skills you wish.
These are the kind of incentives that big cities in the world would offer developers or businesses to bring their businesses to their...
So if we do what China does in one of our special economic zones, if we make it special, then it will be like China's. And in fact, we could make it more special because we can look at what China does and say, well, how can we do even better than that? Which we can. And we could become the world's next China as easy as falling off a log. It's not difficult. You don't need any commission of inquiry. You don't need any presidential committee. You simply say, let's emulate what works and stop doing what fails. Let's discontinue failure and let's start success.
Okay, so I might say something very off color, off put in now, because I'm listening to you and I'm agreeing with you that if you want something like an economy to work, make it easy for people to work in the economy. That stands to reason, and it seems very obvious.
Easy and cheap,
right? But then we're sitting with your submissions on the Labor Law Amendment Bill 2025, the Labor Relations Amendment Bill 2025. And as I look at that and read that, I think is the problem not Parliament and parliamentarians that they sit in a house and they're going, well, what is our job? Our job is to make new laws. So let's add on and add on and add on.
It is, after all, called a legislature. So legislature legislates, but what they need to do is de-legislate.
Could we get that right in South Africa?
Well, the part of which their mindset, the mindset of South Africa, is one size fits all. Under apartheid with the homeland policies, there was in theory that each one would be different, but in fact there was a coordinating central committee that made sure all of them did exactly the same thing. So there was no tolerance of diversity within the country. So what we have to do is get those members of parliament to say what happens in Kucha Special Economic Zone doesn't happen in the Mpumalanga Special Economic Zone, for instance. Let them each be different.
And congratulate them when they don't add amendments, and congratulate them when they make things simpler.
People like Millet has said that and I think even Reagan or somebody said, for every new law you must repeal 2 old ones. So you can't just add new and new, more and more and more law, more and more tax. Every time you add a law, you must at least repeal another one, preferably another 2 or 3 or 4. And every time you add a tax, you must discontinue another tax. In other words,
that is smart.
You must make it easier, cheaper to prosper, for the country to become rich, for the people to become rich. We want to be the world's wealthiest country, and that's not complicated. It's easy to do.
Leon, we're almost finished this discussion in terms of
just
time.
On the labour law, quickly. What we must do is we must start by saying, in those very bills, it should say these do not apply in the special economic zones. That'll be a good start.
There. Yeah. I mean, we haven't even discussed AI. And it's becoming perfectly obvious to anyone with half a brain that a lot of jobs are going to be replaced by AI.
Yes.
Well, have our legislature and our lawmakers taken this into consideration when they ask for submissions and want to amend these bills? Is AI mentioned by legislature?
No. I think they live as if there isn't AI. Very, very few people have grasped what AI
is. That
means.
Because AI can't replace a lawmaker or a politician?
It absolutely can. AI absolutely can and will. It's a lot better way to formulate a law is to ask AI what the law should be, because AI will take into account all of the costs and benefits. Now, I think the implications of artificial intelligence are absolutely breathtaking and astounding. And you say they will replace jobs, but on the other hand, you could say they will make every job 10 times more productive. So everything that is done now by someone working in a bank, they can do 10 times as much. Everybody, and we've seen this with automation of manufacturing, motor cars. Instead of 10 people making 1 car in 1 month, you can now have 1 person making 10 cars in 1 month. And so it can make people more and more productive. It will replace jobs. All sorts of jobs will become redundant, including, for example, medical care, health jobs, doctors.
I thought of that immediately.
Will be replaced. You'll no longer need one. And you can. I had robotic surgery from the first robot in South Africa that did surgery. I had that, and the robot went into me with pegs and spikes and looked around.
Did a better job than a human can.
Did a much better job, much better. The human job would be roughly a 50% success. The robot is about 95% success. So much better. And the surgeon sat in another room looking at a screen. He wasn't even in the surgery while I was operated on. So yes, it'll make surgeons better. It'll make doctors better. It'll make broadcasters, authors, politicians, everybody will be better off if they adopt and understand what AI can do and is. And eventually, in the long run, 30, 40, 50 years from now, there will be no need for human labor at all anymore. Robots will do absolutely everything human beings can do. And apart from actually just being, they could even be nice.
Which would make the Labour Relations Act null and void for all intents and purposes.
Absolutely pointless.
Unless you want to legislate robots and call them employees.
Well, the point is that I spoke to one of the greatest AI people on the planet in a group to which I belong, a Chinese owner of a company that does AI. And I said to him, when will a time come when I can go maybe 500 years as far into the future as biblical times behind us, or Egyptian pharaonic times into the future, when I would be able to go to a dinner party with Tom London, and Tom London will not be able to tell whether my partner is a human being or a robot? When will the robot be so real that it's indistinguishable? Would that be 1,000 years? He said,
not a chance.
I've got a shock for you. He says, we're talking 50 years.
And you won't even know that it's not Tom London you're sitting opposite, because he sent his robot double to the dinner because he didn't feel like it.
You literally will be able to replicate every human being at any age with robotics.
If AI is this powerful, if it's going to have such a big impact on our lives and the world, and if our Labour Relations Act hasn't even mentioned it Is that not one of the most dangerous situations for us to be in when we plan in an economy and plan in jobs in the future?
It's very serious. If you make employing somebody more difficult, more expensive, and more risky, what you are doing is you're saying, replace all labor with robots. And what you have to do is say, how can we protect people from AI? Let alone the unemployed. At the moment,
we haven't got there yet.
From the unemployed. But what about AI?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm sitting here thinking that the sensible thing to do if you're in government is to start thinking very seriously about the implications that AI is going to have.
Very serious. Very serious.
And
they need
do
to
it
go
now.
on training courses to learn what AI is and what it's going to do and what the future holds.
Yeah.
And they need to make sure that when they pass laws like these labor law amendments, which are really primitive, backward-looking, counterproductive, that they realize the foolishness of what they're doing.
Well, thank goodness you're making submissions in response to the call for public comments on the labor law amendment bill and the labor relations amendment bill, Leon, because I don't know if anybody else has mentioned AI, but you have in your submissions.
I suspect we are the only submission that raises the AI problem.
Any last comments?
Or the AI solution.
Yeah.
It's not a problem.
Any last comments you want to make before we close today?
Yes. When people think of better working conditions for anybody, try to pause and say, I'm thinking of a big, sophisticated employer and I'm thinking of somebody fortunate enough to have a job. Pause and say, what about the person who wants to create a business and can't, and the person who wants a job and doesn't have one? Think about the people who are losers, not only the people who are winners.
Got it. Thank you, Leon.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
And thank you for joining us on Through the Liberty Lens. There'll be another program coming out next week. Make sure you catch it.